Okay. So Canada has a lot of ophiolites on both coasts. The examples I'll be showing today are from the Thetford Mines ophiolite in southern Quebec and Bay of Islands in Newfoundland. This is a map of the Thetford Mines ophiolite. In yellow on the upper left are the continental margin sediments, and the synorogenic flysch is on the bottom in gray and greenish. The ophiolites in all these, the ophiolites in all these bright colors here. The dots are the chromite mines, showings, occurrences, whatever. Oh, okay. The uncolored symbols are PGE, unenriched, and the colored symbols are the enriched variants. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of chromites in the mantle. There's a whole bunch near the moho in the dunite, and there's another set within the crust. So this is the pseudostratigraphic column for Bonanite-related ophiolite like Thetford Mines or Betts Cove. You'll notice there's a lot of lower crustal peroxenite because Bonanites crystallize olivine, pyroxene, then feldspar. And the 1, 2, 3 are the first three types of chromitite. One is, one is the intramantle potiform. These are the most commonly mined types. The second is the moho level stratiform. These are just like layered intrusions. The third type is a lower crustal discordant platinum group enriched type. The other three types I'll show examples from Bay of Islands, but we'll start with these. The first type, potiform, forms as in intramantle channels where melt's moving. There's no chromitite in this one. It's just to illustrate the scale of these dunite channels. The dunites are the pale stuff, and the dark stuff is the Hartsburgite. This is from Oman. Typically, it ranges from massive to disseminated to orbicular, usually decameter size, and often aligned like cigars, parallel to the mantle flow lineation. Classic study by Leblanc and Soulenier showing how these things form. You do acquire a bit of chrome by dissolving the wall rock pyroxene, but most of the chromite is transported, suspended in the melt. And this diagram shows quite well here. As it goes up, the bigger chromatites get dumped right away because as soon as they hit the hydraulic jump, they fall out, and you get finer and finer. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is as it's flowing up, you could actually clog the channel. Remember, you have a process called elutriation. The melt's flowing at a certain rate, chromite's denser. At some velocities it'll be entrained, at some velocities it'll sink, and some it'll stay about neutral. And you can actually choke the channel with this stuff and just stop flow completely. The second type, the stratiform, you can imagine that maybe that chromitite channel actually erupts as a moho interface, either as a ponded layer under another magma or as a sill in the lower crust. Some of that chromite might be transported, some might be forming by reaction with the roof or walls, some might be neoformed. Often these things are channeled. So if you find one, you'll usually find more than one. They form networks. This is the Reed Bélanger, one of the larger chromitite mines in Thetford. This is all that's left of it. When it was mined during the World War, the main chromitite zone was 12 meters thick of massive chromitite, so these things are non-negligible. This is an example from a working mine in Albania. You'll see that entire upper part there is all massive to semi-massive chromitite interlayered with dunite below. Typically, these stratiform things are enriched in osmiridium, but not enriched in platinum palladium. This is mainly because of inclusions in the chromitite and extraction of osmiridium PGEs from the melt leads to PG depletion, progressive depletion in the erupted lavas. So there's a mass balance effect here that's pretty clear. The PG enriched tend to occur higher in the crust. I'll be showing you two examples, Hall and Star. This is the Hall deposit. It was actually a small deposit that got completely mined out during a bulk test. It wasn't very big. The chromitite pods are tens of meters in size, and they're sitting in a discordant dunite pipe. this dunite, I'll never learn this. This dunite pipe is discordant to the stratigraphy, and it's parallel to synmagmatic faults. So you can see in these faults, there's xenoliths of hydrothermally altered websterite injected by fresh lertzolite. Now, parallel to these structures, you get this dunite pipe that is discordant to the foliation. You occasionally find relics of the wall rocks in it that retain that same stratigraphic pattern. The wall rocks are the usual lower crustal proxenites and peridiotites, lots of pyroxene. As you get close to the dunite pipe, the pyroxene progressively disappears, and you just get few little relics of it parallel to the main fabric of the wall rock. So you're just replacing pyroxene by olivine. And when you get in the core, you have totally massive dunite, and the chromitite is a brecciaphil. You can see a clast being detached here, starting to detach here, and can inject along millimeter-sized veinlets. So you're talking about a really low viscosity fluid to be able to penetrate these tiny fractures. Star is much smaller. This is it, right? It's got an axial chromitite with really funky geometry in dunite, and the dunite is reacting with the host websterite to form orthoproxenite. Now, these two deposits are enriched in platinum and palladium. Osmiridium is the same as in the stratiform, but there's net and marked enrichment in platinum and palladium, especially for star chrome. Star chrome palladium is very interesting because it's associated with mercury, an amalgam called podarite, and it's spatially associated with greenschist facies minerals, fills little cracks in the chromite. So this is hydrothermal reworking of the original platinum, palladium, nickel, iron, copper alloy, and remobilizing it. And this showing is actually surrounded by a light rare earth enriched halo. And so in areas of poor outcrop, it might be useful to look for mercury light rare earth anomalies in your ground, in your soils, because the mercury is going to be pretty easy to spot. How do these deposits form? We all know oceanic lithosphere is active, extensional, with lots of normal faults. Imagine you place a large body of magma underneath here. You let it fractionate. These are bonanites. They start with 4% water, and usually with lots of chlorine. And so you could think as it crystallizes, it's going to saturate. A lot of the volatiles are going to migrate up to the apex of the chamber. Lots of chlorine, which favors solubilization of platinum, palladium, and chrome. Now imagine it's injecting along a fossil fault, resorbing its walls, and the destabilizing effect of chlorine is it destabilizes pyroxene more than olivine, more than chromite. And that's why you get that dunite halo and the chromite at the core. When the fault actually contacts this chamber, it'll drain, right? So you'll get a huge decompression effect, and the chrome just falls out of solution and fills the breccia. So that's how these things form. Now we're going to turn to Bay of Islands and discuss reactional chromatites, a completely different thing. This is the North Arm Massif. This is very steeply dipping, mantle, tholeiitic gabbro crust, tholeiitic dikes, tholeiitic lavas, and the moho here is injected by a bonanite sill complex, and that's where all the chromatites are. Bonanites are good for chromite because they're magnesium and chrome rich, so you know it's kind of a no-brainer. So the key message is here that these reactional chromatites form by resorbing other minerals. The type 4 forms by resorbing pyroxene, type 5 by resorbing feldspar, and type 6, which I'm sort of trying to define now, forms when you eat ferrogabbro, and that forms a weird chromite that's rich in iron, titanium, and vanadium. So the concept is simple. The melt's coming up. Whatever it sees, it's not in equilibrium with. If it sees pyroxene, it poops out high chrome chromatite. If it sees feldspar, it poops out aluminous chromatite. Now, the North Arm example is the feather edge of the system. Way too small to form real deposits, but small enough to freeze in halfway so we can see what the hell's going on. Whereas most places, it goes to completion, like the Philippines, all you see is a ghost stratigraphy in the chromite, high chrome, low chrome, and dunite in the transition zone. And I would argue that the Philippine deposits are just more advanced versions of what I'm going to be explaining to you now. This is a detailed map of the moho in the thickest part of the ultramafic zone. Mantles down here, thin dunite. There are some tiny little stratiform chromatites, but they're not on this map. Most of the high chrome chromatites you find in association with the lowermost crustal peroxenites, whereas the aluminous chromatites are found in association with felspathic peridotite that are much higher in the stratigraphy. This is what the high chrome chromatites look like. They're pretty small. Deformation has thickened them in fold noses. You'll notice there's little dunite and chromatite channels throughout. These things form by incongruent dissolution of pyroxene. And the explanation is simple. Most lower crustal pyroxenes have a lot of chrome, 0.5, 0.6% sometimes, way more than can be dissolved in the melt. And so when you resorb the pyroxene, you inevitably form a chromatite byproduct by incongruent dissolution. Spinel chemistry, these type 4, the high chrome chromatites are way up there. This is the best stuff you can get because very little iron, very little aluminum. The type 5, the aluminous chromatites are all in here. The FETV ones are out here somewhere. I won't talk about those anymore. But you'll notice these yellow diamonds. Those are the felspathic peridotites that host the aluminous chromatites. More on that to come. So we'll take a quick look at these things. There's actually gabbro relics in here. And the interpretation is you have a replenishing magma that comes into a weakly consolidated hot gabbro. The gabbro starts to melt. The bonanite's at 1400 degrees. Gabbros melt at 900. So they disaggregate. They fall apart and mix with the incoming melt and form a slurry. And you can see little xenoliths of gabbro in there. Occasionally you see chromatite schlieren. This is a full thin section scan. They're really small. But the real player here is the host rock. These felspathic peridotites don't look like much, but they contain anywhere between 5 and 10% chromite, and very large chromite, millimeter size, anhedral, and they form at the surfaces of the felspar. So I would argue these are these are gabbroic microxenoliths that are being resorbed. And the chromite forms in dissolution pits. Clearly, this felspar is dissolving incongruently. There's a lot of aluminum, so you form an aluminous spinel. The chrome gets sucked out of the melt. We thought this was kind of interesting, so we actually did a mineral processing test at CanMet. And yeah, it's low grade. It's 0.5, 0.4% chrome, which doesn't sound very interesting. But because of the coarse grain size, you can actually recover 84% of that chromite using very conventional gravity and flotation magnetic techniques. You know, very simple methodology. The gangue, the tailings, completely inert, so that's good. But the real surprise for me was that there's almost 2% pentlandite in the mineral separates, and these pentlandites have platinum and palladium minerals attached to them. So this is a bit of a surprise because bonanites usually don't form magmatic sulfide deposits because they're so sulfur poor. Typical bonanites have about 100 ppm sulfur. I have data from Betts Cove, Tetford, and they're all in that ballpark. And for them to become saturated in magmatic sulfide, they have to fractionate to dacite, basically, which is kind of a non-starter, especially if you're looking at a peridotites. Dacites don't crystallize peridotites. So where does the sulfur come from? Well, duh. It comes from eating sulfurized host rocks. This is what the host rocks are like. These are gabbronorites that are just stuffed with little hydrothermal veins, some of which have pyrite. And we can see these hydrothermally altered gabbros dissolving into the intrusive peridotites. So that's where the sulfur comes from. It's crustal sulfur, originally hydrothermal, that's been being eaten by the magma and forcing sulfide immiscibility. This facies is very widespread. I've been showing you North Arm, but you can see analogs in every single Bay of Islands massif. Now, I'm not suggesting we're going to go out and strip mine Bay of Islands. Most of it's apart. Though the back end of Blomidon might actually be a plausible target. So these things are big, actually, in terms of total size. The North Arm occurrence was 200 meters thick and outcrops discontinuously for about 5 kilometers. And it outcrops discontinuously for almost 100 kilometers. So these are potentially quite large. So just to summarize, they're pretty big, but though the grade is low, they're often associated potentially with sulfide, nickel sulfide, and PGEs. So there's an FO2 effect here. If you eat too much sulfide, you lower the FO2 and stop forming spinel. So there might be a Goldilocks ratio where you eat just enough sulfide to trigger miscibility, scavenge all the platinum palladium, but don't prevent spinel from forming. So just to conclude, these are the 6 chromitite subtypes. Potiform, intramantle, conduits, stratiform, just like layered intrusions, usually at the moho. And the potiform are usually very close to the moho. If you go more than a couple kilometers below, you're not going to find them anymore. There's a rare type, discordant crustal PGE rich. There's some in Albania, there's some in the Shetlands. And the other 3 are reactional. Simple consequence of putting a hot magma that's not saturated in pyroxene and feldspar and against crustal rocks. They're going to dissolve, and half the time going to form chromite as well. So thank you for your attention.